Hey guys, how's it going? Alex Scott here with Consordini.com. Thank you so much for checking out another one of our super cool studio gear reviews. Today, we're taking a look at one of my absolute favorite plugins for beat making and kind of drum programming, electronic drum programming. This is Spark 2 from Arturia. Now, originally Spark 2 came bundled with Arturia's kind of hardware slash software digital drum machine systems. So that was the original Spark, which was a pretty big unit, and then the SparkLE, which is a much smaller, more compact, kind of portable unit. And they both are designed to emulate working on kind of old school hardware drum machines, but also give you all the flexibility and compatibility and usability of plugins, and this is the plugin side of it. Now, you can absolutely run Spark 2 as just a plugin, and that's what we're going to be doing today. I do own a SparkLE. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me right now, but as we go through covering the plugin, I'm going to talk about all the ways which it interacts with the controller, and if you guys have one or it sounds interesting, I would highly recommend picking one up alongside the controller because it is a really amazing system when you put them together. But again, whether you have the controller or not, it's a phenomenal plugin if you do beat making, whether that's for EDM stuff, hip hop, really any circumstance where you need to do any kind of electronic or sampled beat. Spark 2 is a great tool to have. One of my personal favorites just because of how it works. Okay, so we're going to hear some sounds from this. There's a ton in the libraries that you get when you download Spark 2, so I'm not going to go through all the sounds. We will listen to a few of them, but I'm mainly going to focus on just running through all the kind of controls and options and how you get it set up real quickly. This is a really deep plugin, as you guys are going to see as we go through it. I'm not going to spend too much time diving super deep into all of the features and different things that you can do. I'm going to try to do a good, even-keeled overview, and we'll hear some sounds as we go along. So this is our main page when we very first open up Spark 2. And if you are familiar with the Spark controllers, again, the older one, the full-size Spark or the SparkLE, this will look very familiar. Right now, I have it kind of configured for the SparkLE because that's the controller that I have back at home. And it pretty much, this screen mirrors the face of the controller perfectly. Now, if you connect a full-size Spark, this GUI will actually change to reflect the full-size Spark as well. So that's kind of cool. But it gives you a very direct one-to-one kind of a feel with your hardware controller, but this also totally works as just an on-screen interface as well. So either way, you're totally covered. So we have some features that you will totally recognize from a lot of drum machines, like a 16-step sequencer here. And this, again, corresponds to your controller. So if you want to input and create sequences on your controller, this is where you're going to be able to do that. Whether this is one way to do it on screen, we also have this sequencer window here that we'll get to in just a second. But when you're working on your controller, this is where you'll be able to do those step sequences. You'll select a pad, and then you'll be able to input a step sequence. And that's one of my favorite things about working with Spark, in particular with the Spark controllers, is that it works very much like a classic, kind of 808 style drum machine that we all know and have used before, and we understand that 16-step sequencer layout. It's not like a 4x4 grid of pads, and I really prefer working this way because it does work like an old school analog drum machine, which is what I'm used to working with. So again, we've got our step sequencer. We've got some different options for what mode we're working with, whether it's an overall pattern. We can bank through our patterns. We have a whole song mode, which we'll also get to in a second in the song tab here. But this, most of the time, you're going to stay on your sequence mode here. Copy and erase to copy different sequences from one instrument to another. Sequence position, so you can have up to 64 step sequences, 16 notes at a time. Turning on and off our accent for different steps. Again, this is all stuff that's going to be reflected on the front of your Spark 2 controller. Up here at the top, we have a basic transport control: record, stop, play and pause, tempo, shuffle, volume. And then on our Spark controller, we also have an XY touch sensitive pad, and that is reflected here in our plugin. Now, this works just as well as, kind of this software interface, just using it as a plugin as it does on the physical controller. So this XY does a few different things. We can set it up as a filter, as a slicer, or as a roller, and these are all going to kind of affect our sound differently. So the filter obviously is going to be a high or low pass filter depending on how you set it up, so you can get that nice filter sweep effect. This all you can automate all of this as well within your DAW if you're using it simply as a plugin. Our slicer is going to kind of chop and repeat things and slice our beat up, and then our roller is going to create a roll effect on individual instruments. So if you want to do like a really fast snare drum or roll or something like that, you can do that. So it does have some very nice live performance features, especially when you're using it in conjunction with the hardware. Now, depending on which sound you have selected, you also have instrument parameters, and these are editable from right here, or of course this is going to correspond to the 3 knobs on your SparkLE controller. On the larger Spark controller, there's actually these 3 knobs on each individual pad. There's 8 pads, and each of them has their own bank of 3 knobs, which is very, very cool. But either way, in the software interface here, we have pitch, we have decay, and click decay for this particular sound. So very, very handy. You can just access those right here, or again, if we're using the controller, this is what we will be able to do directly on the controller to save ourselves from having to click around inside the software. So this is the main basic page, and this really is the page where you're going to spend most of your time if you're working with the controller. Okay, that's really the key here. Once we get into the rest of the plugin, which we do by navigating through these tabs up here, that's where we get really into the software side of things. So whether or not you're using the controller, this is all going to be done exclusively within the plugin, okay? Before we dive into that, I'll just cover up here real quick. We have new project, save, copy, or save as rather, all this kind of standard stuff. We also can navigate through our sound libraries up here, which is very handy. A few other basic controls like the host tempo syncing, all that kind of stuff. We do have a metronome option if you are recording full beats directly with pads, and master volume, peak indicator in case we get a little bit too loud, CPU usage indicator. Very, very basic things. Getting into sequencer, this is where things really start to get fun, and this is actually one of the reasons why Spark is one of my personal favorite sequencing and kind of drum programming plugins, because of the way this sequencer page works. So if we were working with our controller, let's say we've created a sequence, which again, you do exactly like you would expect to do on a hardware drum machine. You select your instrument, lay out a pattern, and then kind of layer different instruments on top of each other. You guys all know the process. That's all going to show up right here in our sequencer window. So just for the sake of argument, I'm just going to program in very quickly and very easily a simple little kind of housey groove here. Again, if you are not using the controller, this is just as easy to do in the computer. Now watch this. This I think is incredibly cool. We've got kick, got snare, we've got hi-hat, all that basic stuff. See this little export right here? Boom. How neat is that? Now, I know that there are a few different drum applications on the market that do this, but what I think Spark is really cool for is the fact that it is so easy to do either MIDI or boom, we can grab audio and end up with an actual waveform and just drag it straight into our session. So this is really, really, really handy for getting a bunch of different variations of a groove very, very quickly, because you can kind of build things from the ground up and then use your DAW as a sequencer and arranger instead of just kind of a tempo sync or something and having to do a bunch of song arrangement in your little host or in your little plugin window here. We can, that's our groove variation. And then let's say we do a slightly different variation here with some open hi-hats. Boom, that's now our B groove. Let's say we add some percussion here. Boom, that's our C groove. Now, if I had the controller in front of me, I would be creating all of these sequences on the fly on the controller. And then again, there's just the ease of use, being able to drag it up and just drop it straight into your DAW window. So cool, so intuitive, so fast. I'm sure that other things can do this. I'm sure there's a way to do this in Machine, but with Spark, it's right there. You don't have to even think about it. It's blatantly obvious to anyone using it how to do it, and it's just that simple. You could make a couple of fills, drag those out, and then you're just going to have each of these individual MIDI loops, or again, you can easily do it as an audio loop too. No worries. And you're now going to have those in your DAW, so that once you get your beats made and your beats programmed, you can then just go back to using and arranging everything in your DAW like you normally would. incredibly cool feature. It's something that I use all the time, and it's one of the main reasons that I absolutely love Spark. So, a few other things to note in this sequencer window. Obviously, you've got all your different instruments here, 1 through 16. You can do velocity as well as any other typical MIDI parameters down here. So you can do those on a per note and per track basis, which is very handy. We then also have our banks and our pattern numbers. These are going to be important if we do end up using this song kind of configuration or arrangement tool within the plugin. I don't use this a ton, so I don't pay attention to those. I just use this export feature and then do everything within the DAW. But then we also have, time signature in case we want to mess with that, bar steps, resolution, all kind of typical things. Now moving on, we do have this song arrange mode. I'm not really going to talk too much about it because I personally find it very, very confusing. But if you want, if you're used to working with something like Machine and you're used to doing arrangements within your plugin that then are kind of tied to global arrangements in your DAW, this is Spark's facility to do that. I really don't work that way, so I can't speak to how intuitive it is. I know that you have your different banks and your different patterns, and then you pull those down here into this kind of matrix to arrange your whole tune. Again, it's not something I really use. It's nice that they've included it if you're used to working that way, but not something that I am super into. Going over to Studio, this is where you're going to really do most of your sound sculpting, okay? So right in the middle here, you kind of have this little rack, and this is the actual, where you control the actual sound itself. And then as you move through the different sounds that are part of your kit, you're going to see the different parameters for each one come up. So right now I have this vintage box kit loaded up, which is kind of like a super old school Roland rhythm box. You're talking like late 60s, early 70s, the oldest drum machines that we have. That's what this whole sample set is kind of emulating. And we have our basic controls for this, with volume, pan, super basic stuff, but also cutoff filters, auxes, which we'll get into when we get into the mixer, pitch, decay, kind of some basic stuff. You then have 2 effects racks, which you can load in. They've got a nice little selection of bit crusher, chorus, compressor, delay, kind of your basic run-of-the-mill mixing effects, which you can load in. And then as you go through, obviously, each of your different instruments or each of your different samples are going to have different options for all of those. And you'll be able to set everything up differently as you go through. So very, very handy. It's just a nice little kind of all-in-one window for getting a little bit more creative with the different samples and sounds that you have in your kit. Now, if you really want to go crazy, you can go over into this modular tab. And this is where you get more into kind of synthesis style stuff. So as you can see, we've got this window here and we have all these different modules. And this is, more like stuff that you would see in a modular synthesizer. So we have oscillator, we have filter, we have envelope, we have LFO, we have all these different modules, and we can patch them all together just like you would in a modular synth or kind of a node-based manner, which is, I think this is interesting. Again, not something I do a ton with, but if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of how each sample is being generated and really get deep into some sound design stuff, you can absolutely do this. You have all the tools that you're going to need. And you can, of course, do this on an instrument-by-instrument basis. So this is the snare drum, and if we want to really go in here and look at what oscillators they're using to create the sound and really tweaking stuff and customizing each and every little nuance of all the sounds, you can do it. Works like a modular synth. It's definitely not for beginners. You have to really know what you're doing in here, even to get it to work. I know modular synthesis, but I love the way that all of their samples and all their kits sound to begin with. So, I'm not too terribly concerned with it. I think it's a great sounding plugin overall, and all the kits they've included sound excellent. So I don't really spend any time in here, but if you want to really get into that super deep sound design, you are more than welcome to. So that's our modular tab. Moving over, we have a mixer tab. This is pretty much exactly what you would expect. We also have those same effects that we see here in the studio tab, where you can load the 2 different effect slots. Those are also reflected here in the mixer. We also have aux 1 and aux 2 and pan and overall volume, all that stuff, again, kind of reflected in the studio window. These two they're very similar tabs. They're just kind of different ways of visualizing the layout of your kit. So this this obviously is a much more traditional mixer way of looking at it, and this is a more modular rack-based, kind of sampler-based way of looking at things. There's a lot of crossover between the functions. It's really just in how you like to work. Moving on from there, we have our libraries. Now, again, there's a couple things in Spark that make me love this plugin. And the first thing is the sequencer, how easy and intuitive the sequencer is, and that whole drag and drop feature, amazing. The second thing, the libraries. Spark comes with a ton of content. There's also a lot of expandable content on their site. And what they've done differently than something like a Machine or any of the other kind of beat creation platforms out there is their libraries are very full-featured, they sound excellent, and they're very, very simple. If you guys have watched any of my other plugin reviews, you'll know that I'm a serious sucker for like old school analog gear, right? In my big studio back home, I have a number of analog drum machines and classic synthesizers. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart and a big part of my production process. I'm not nearly as big of a fan of these kind of modern catch-all, something like a Massive from Native Instruments. There's some amazing sounds in it, but when I'm composing or when I'm producing or when I'm working on a track, I reach into my brain and I think of other songs and other artists and the sounds that they've used. And that's kind of my vocabulary, right? So when I think about Kraftwerk, I think of all the different synthesizers that Kraftwerk used. When I think about progressive rock, maybe Rush, 2112, I think of the synthesizers that were used on that record. And that's what forms my vocabulary for how I work. So when I think 80s, I think Roland Juno. And I'm going to reach for a Roland Juno. When I think 80s drums, I want to reach for a Linn drum, right? And right here we've got Linn 9000 and Limb Dream. If I'm thinking about classic hip-hop, obviously I'm thinking of an 808 or a 909, or even potentially a 606 or something like that. And the way the Spark libraries are laid out, it's very similar to Arturia's V collection. We have all of these classic, legendary sound sets, and they're just dead simple, and they're right here, right out of the box. I don't need to scroll through anything. I can just go to the Spark Vintage portion of their library, and all my favorite vintage drum machines are right there. I don't have to sift through sample libraries. I don't have to do anything. It's right there. I want an 808, boom, there's an 808. I want a 720 Roland 727, boom, there it is. I don't have to do anything. Now, of course, it comes with all kinds of kits. It's not just vintage stuff. You have a bunch of very modern kits as well for if you're doing dubstep or like modern trap or anything like that. These are all full kits, this whole massive list right here. It comes with everything you're ever going to need. I just personally, I gravitate towards those vintage sounds, and the fact that they've made it so easy for me to find and understand and go, you know, I have an idea in my head. Yes, it's kind of a Linn drum vibe. I can just scroll through here. It's called Linn. I grab it, and we're good to go. I don't have to do this guessing game of like, oh, well, it's called the Vintomatic 12. I wonder what that's supposed to be. They've made it very, very clear what's a vintage kit, what's not, and within those vintage kits, it's very easy to navigate. So I love that, and it's a big part of why I use Spark a lot in my productions. But again, if you want modern sounds, there's plenty of those as well. They do sound great. We can just go ahead and pull up a couple of different kits here, some of my favorite ones that I really, really like. You know, in terms of like modern stuff, thinking about lo-fi hip-hop, this NYC kit is really, really nice. Mother. Nay, nay. And some of these do have some really nice samples in them. Super, super hip, right? Sounds really, really nice, and it's got these cool kind of Marvin Gaye-ish. Mother. Some really, really nice samples. Neo Soul is another great kit. There's some very, very hip stuff in here. And you know, I use a lot of those kinds of kits, those like Neo Soul lo-fi kits. And you've got so much flexibility in the studio and mixer area. If I want to go in and make them a little crispier or crunchier, you can do that. But then, like I said, I'm a big sucker for the vintage stuff. So if we go up here, we can find maybe just like a classic, like a Roland 606. Those sounds we all know and love. Or the Linn drums are really, really nice in here. Super classic Linn Dream. Ha 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 ha. Love it. It sounds really authentic. It sounds really, really, really nice. It's thick. It's in your face. Velocity sensitivity is great, whether you're using the original Spark controller, the SparkLE, or another controller like what I'm using right now. It's awesome. All of the classic sounds are very, very authentic. All the modern sounds are very applicable. They're not too crazy and over the top. I usually stay away from those ones, so I'm not going to pull one up this exact second. But really, it's a great set of stuff that's very usable no matter what style of music you're producing. It all sounds really, really good, and it's very, very versatile. But there's also not so much in here that it's overwhelming. I'm not sure the exact number of kits in the list. I think it's somewhere between 100 and 200, but it's enough for me to constantly be finding new things, even after years of using this. But not so much that I feel like I would never get through most of it, if you know what I mean. It's a really nice middle ground, so that's very, very cool as well. Within this library browser, we have projects. If you want to browse through your own projects, we have instruments. So if you want to build a custom kit with different hat sounds or whatever, you of course can do all that. And then you can import samples here if you want to bring in your own samples and use them in the modular area or whatever. You can get really, really deep if you want to. And finally, we just have our preferences tab here, and this obviously is where you're going to do all your settings and velocity sensitivity and all this kind of stuff. So that really is a good overview of Spark for you guys. Now, again, kind of my closing thoughts here. I love this plugin. I absolutely love it. I use it all the time. I have Machine. I have a Machine studio back home, and I'll use Machine sometimes. I find Machine is much better for like doing sample slicing. So if I want to take like a sample of a vinyl record and chop it up and really build my own kits with all kinds of different sounds that I've recorded, Machine is very intuitive for doing that. But I feel like with Machine, especially, even within the plugin, running it in your DAW, it's kind of like a DAW first. It's so full-featured and so incredibly intense, and you could do entire records and mix them and master them within Machine if you really know what you're doing. And that's more than I need. I do a lot of beat making. It's not my go-to thing. I'm not churning out royalty-free trap beats every single day, all day, like some guys are. But I do plenty of it, whether it's producing stuff for video games or working with other artists or whatever. I make a lot of beats. But even then, because I'm so accustomed to working within Studio One, I don't need a second DAW. I don't need all these crazy arrangement features right there kind of integrated into how I'm working. It's just a little bit too much for me. What I would love is a plugin that allows me to sequence a beat on a hardware device, take that beat and very easily drag in the data so that I can arrange and edit everything within the DAW that I'm used to working in. And what do we have here? Boom, wouldn't you know it? We have exactly that. I love it. I think it's great. I think the sounds that comes with it are great. But even beyond the sounds, I think that the workflow is really, really ideal. So if you're somebody who does a lot of beat production, but you're not looking for something so crazy and so intense as Machine, not to knock any of the Machine users out there, it is great software. But if you feel overwhelmed by that, I think Spark 2 is a great option for you. The SparkLE controller is also really, really affordable. It's right around, I think, $120 brand new, and you get this Spark 2 right alongside of it. The plugin, I think, is maybe $100 on its own. And even if you don't have the controller, I think it's a great plugin to use because it doesn't require the controller. You can use it like I've been using it here with a different keyboard or pad or whatever you want to do. It's going to work with anything. The controller just adds that additional layer of physical capability to it, which is also very, very cool. But But yeah, overall, 5, 10 thumbs up, 1,000 stars, whatever. I love Spark. I use it all the time. If you guys are looking to check out something for making your beats, I definitely recommend it. One other just final thing that I want to say, Spark is an older piece of software. I'm not sure when the last version of it was released. I want to say like 2018 or something like that. So Arturia guys, if you're watching, please do a Spark update. Bring us Spark 3. There's a lot of people who love this software. It is getting a little long in the tooth in a few areas, but overall, it's still incredible. So if anybody from Arturia is watching, we would love an update. We'd love a new version. Keep making the hardware controllers. It's all great. But what do you guys think? What are your favorite beat creation platforms? Do you enjoy particular plugins? Do you like to work in Machine? Whatever your thoughts may be, definitely leave in the comments down below. I love hearing from you guys. If you have not yet subscribed to the Consordini channel, please do so. It really helps us out. If you want to give this video a like or a share, that is always welcome as well. Regardless, my name is Alex Scott with Consordini.com. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.